Okay, ladies and gentlemen, video number 3, and I just thought of this, and it's not a subject I like to talk about, but since I am from Utah, and since it still comes up pretty often, I thought I should talk about it a little bit. But you know, I grew up in I was born in the 60s. Most of my memories from the 70s, and I remember when I was a young man, of course, my church's policy on blacks in the priesthood was a sore spot with a lot of people. And I remember in those times, it seemed like every BYU sports event, there were, protests and people throwing things, and, why do you do this, why do you do that? And then in 1978, it all changed. And I remember everyone that I was aware of, everyone that I came in contact with, so thrilled with this change. Okay, no more will we, we got tired of being the target of so much anger. I'm gonna hop over this fence again and everything. And then in 1981, I went as a missionary to Japan, and in Japan, not many people know that much about the church or whatever, but this issue did come up on occasion. And I remember, here's the answer I settled on, and I have no basis for it other than my personal opinion. Why did the church do this? And now I have kind of some other opinions, but this is what I settled on at the time. I said, well, I'm not sure, but either they weren't ready for us or we weren't ready for them. and God knew this. Therefore, in his infinite wisdom, in 1978, it all changed. However, I have come to find out that back in the 1830s, when the church began, there was already kind of a similar sentiment in what do they call it? In Masonism. And many of the early Mormons were Masons. And it's my estimation that, particularly in Ohio, if this church would have been organized and said, okay, every worthy man in the world can be called to the priesthood, blah, 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 there probably would have been a huge backlash because of that. I don't know, but I did a quick search on ChatGPT, and I said, tell me about the history of the blacks and the Masons in Ohio in the 1830s. And as I suspected, yeah, there were no black, what do they call them? Not dioceses, what do they call these organizations in the Masons? And they weren't accepted. And then there started to be some black units popping up all over, but they weren't accepted by the other ones. They thought that they were gone rogue, and they were not accepted. So I have a feeling that the early members of the church were highly influenced by this. But as I pointed out when I was a missionary, however, I've always been taught ever since I was a boy that someday this would change and they would get the priesthood. And lo and behold, 1978 came and they got the priesthood, and everyone was completely fine with it. So anyways, it kind of gets back to the church's I think the church remembers this period, and it was a distasteful period in our history when we were getting all this backlash at every BYU sporting event. I have a feeling when wokeness or the LGBT issues came along, they said, oh no, they probably said, we don't want a repeat of this. Therefore, they kind of bend over backwards to be thought of as good global citizens and take really a kind of a too soft of a stand, I think. And most people I know think that they're too soft on woke issues, and I don't know, kind of goes against one of the prophets of my youth was Gordon B. Hinckley, one of my favorite, and he wrote a book called Stand for Something. And then I've heard from other people who used to be strong members who now either left or whatever. We talk about things like this, and they're saying, well, it's their impression that the PR department in the church is being run by lawyers, and they have way too big an influence on church policy or church official communications. And so the more I think about that, the more I think, wow, they're probably right. And especially when you see, like the letter written by President Nelson about COVID early on, encouraging all members to, no reference to the science, no reference to inspiration, no reference to anything, but just trust our well-meaning government leaders and our well-meaning medical leaders. They have your heart, your best interest in heart, rather than just reiterating the policy that was already in place at the time and still is in place at the time, saying decisions on vaccines is a personal decision, and we encourage everybody to seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit as they make these decisions, and consult their trusted medical professionals as they consider these vaccines. And it's my thought that that letter came about, probably, this is my thinking, that President Nelson came out of that world, medical world, and he has personal faith in all these medical professionals, but I don't. But the original church policy on vaccines, I can live with. I can still live with it because it hasn't changed and never changed. But as a result, I never had the vaccine, and I probably never have another one, COVID or otherwise. But anyways, I hope YouTube is allowing this kind of speech these days, because that's just another signal of how our freedoms are being encroached. But anyways, let's see if this one gets a warning. Thank you for listening. But anyways, yeah, he came from that world. He was indoctrinated in this, medicine, and this, in our society, we put doctors on such a pedestal. Oh my heavens. My parents were that way, and probably many of my siblings still are. And that's not me. I'm of the RFK persuasion, and who's the other guy? The doctor on YouTube that says our food is our medicine, or that's what we should consider it to be. What's his name? I forgot. Oh, but I highly recommend you watching him. But I think functional medicine, he has a center called something about functional medicine. What's his name? It's slipped from my memory, but it's all over YouTube, and I just love him. And there's a couple of other guys that I just think are just absolutely fabulous on YouTube. So anyways, that was my thoughts. And anyways, I'd love negative or positive comments, any kind of comments, any kind of feedback. I cherish. I love it. As Charlie Kirk said, you know, more speech is always better than less. So thank you for listening. Bye-bye.